Hello and welcome everyone to Behind the Steam with the Marshall Steam Museum. My name is Ali Schell. I am the Director of Public Programs here at the museum. And topic for tonight's program is Stanley Mountain Wagons. And we've invited in longtime volunteer with us, Kelly Williams, who will be speaking about the early history of mountain wagons, why they were made, also talking about the really unique mountain wagon that we have in our collection, as well as some other mountain wagons that were connected to the Marshall family. So I think you're in for a real treat tonight. We've also invited in two other museums that have mountain wagons in their collection, the Cove Auto Museum, as well as the collections on Palmetto, for just a real quick update and conversation with them about what they have in their collection. And then finally, we're going to end with a Q&A, a live Q&A with Kelly Williams and Seal Cove Auto Museum. Talk a little bit more about mountain wagons and any questions that you might have from this presentation. And if this is your first time joining us, Behind the Steam is our collections exploration series where we pick different items in our collection. Sometimes they're Stanley steam cars and sometimes they're other items. And we invite in experts and enthusiasts, both local and national, to have a conversation about them. And we like to try and connect it not only to the local history here, but also to the national history as well. So without further ado, let's get this program started. I'm going to put 30 seconds on the countdown clock here. So feel free to get comfortable, grab a little drink or something to eat, and let's get started in 30 seconds. I am excited to have with us here this evening longtime volunteer at Auburn Heights, Kelly Williams, to talk about the history of mountain wagons and our site's connection to mountain wagon history. Before we fully delve in, Kelly, can you tell us how long you've been at Auburn Heights and where your interest in Stanley's first came from?
Well, I've been volunteering at Auburn Heights for a little bit over 14 years now. I've been interested in Stanley's since I was a kid and steam cars because I had found some of my dad's old antique car magazines, and that particular magazine had reprinted a few instruction manuals for Stanley's, and I just happened upon those things and started reading them. I was like, oh, this is really, really cool. I've just been fascinated ever since. And toward the end of 2006, I really started to have time and the fabulous opportunity that is Auburn Heights was there for me, and so I've been down there ever since.
How did you find out about us?
Oh, I knew about Mr. Marshall and Mr. Marshall ever since, for the same length of time, because they were major figures in, especially Clarence, in the early steam car hobby in the 40s and 50s. They were the go-to people. So I knew those names and that place for my whole life, basically.
All right, so Kelly, why don't you start off telling us when mountain wagons first came on the scene and what they originally used for?
Okay, well, the very first ones were built in the middle of 1908, and that was because F.O. Stanley was spending a lot of his time in Estes Park for his health and getting very deeply involved in the community. I found it kind of interesting that in these times when disease is on everyone's mind, that disease was actually a component in the development of the Stanley Mountain Wagon, because about 1903, F.O. Stanley had suffered a relapse of the tuberculosis that he had when he was younger. And he needed to find a place like Colorado for his health, and so he went there, and it really agreed with him. He felt a lot better, and he started spending much of his time there in Estes Park, which was a burgeoning tourist destination. And so he was able to outfit some of the people who were hauling guests at that time with some of the early Stanley touring cars. And then when he started the construction of his own hotel, he decided, I think we can make a purpose-built vehicle, especially for making this long climb from the train station to our hotel.
How long was the ride from the train station to the Stanley Hotel?
Estes Park was a 35-mile climb by road from the railroad depot at Loveland, Colorado. And Stanley Touring Cars had already kind of proven their worth at bringing people up that long hill and haul guests and luggage in a really effective way. And
Stanleys were known for making those hill climbs rather seamlessly, so
exactly
makes sense.
In 1908, the Stanleys took their largest and most powerful touring car, which was called the Model M, and they lengthened the chassis a little bit. They added a third seat, and those last two seats were removable, so the thing had flexibility for hauling people or luggage, and sent some out there to Estes Park, and they did yeoman duty in ferrying people back and forth between the train station and the hotel. And they did such a good job that other people became interested in them for exactly the same purpose, and the Stanleys added them to their regular product line in 1909. They used them for auto stages, which I think were kind of like the first descendant of actual horse-drawn stages. You know, people would set up regularly scheduled transit between 2 points, and the Stanley would be the vehicle that did that.
Kelly, can you share examples of early auto stages?
Gilroy Hot Springs stage, for example, the Geysers stage. Resorts like that would just buy these mountain wagons to bring their guests to their place.
I mean, they're very impressive. I can imagine someone seeing that and wanting to know where they were going and how they could get a ride.
and of course, of quite a different character than any other vehicles that were doing the same job at that time. You know, because they would have been making a lot of noise and grinding and crashing, and here this great big Stanley was, you know, doing its mild-mannered chuff and hauling lots of people and weight around.
And from some of the images that you sent me, I noticed that there were different models of mountain wagons, which is just something I didn't realize. So I saw there was like Model Zs, Model 88s, and then ours is a Model 820. So I don't know what the differences are, or if you can tell us more about.
They changed their model, pretty much changed their model designations every year. So they had to do something with it. They ran out of letters with the Model Z in 1909. So in 1910, they switched to using numerical designations. And they started out with 2-digit designations, and the first digit was represented the size of the power plant. So the 10 horsepower cars started with a 6, and 20 horse were 7, and the 30 horse were 8. So that's why it was an 88. And there were some other 2-digit mountain wagon models. Those were still 3-seat cars. As a matter of fact, you know, we have our 76 20 horse car. We have our 607 10 horse car. So then, well, they ran out of 2-digit numbers, so then they had to make them 3-digit numbers. So then there was 812 and 820, and actually, it turns out that that ours is a very special mountain wagon. That there only one like it was ever made. Just the one that we have is the only one, and it has its own model number, and I believe it is 822.
Do you know approximately how many mountain wagons that are out there currently, or as many as that you could have counted?
I'd say it's somewhere between 20 and 30. The interesting thing is that a lot of them are modern constructions, because the mountain wagon is just so cool to have around. You know, you can haul lots of people, around and have a good time. You can haul lots of stuff if you're on a tour. So people just started making them. And in fact, there are a number of these Model Z 3-seat mountain wagons driving around today, and you'll probably see one on an Eastern tour if you come on one. There are no remaining factory Model Zs. All of the Model Zs are recreations. So there are some 4-seat cars that you could consider factory cars, and a number of 4-seat cars that were fabricated, and then there's our special car.
You know if there were any other companies during this time kind of making steam buses? Was Stanley the only company that you know of?
Yeah, Stanley was there were only 2 steam car manufacturers of any volume at all during that time, and of course it was Stanley and White. And White's, they did some commercial things, delivery vehicles and ambulances, but I have not seen pictures of White buses. And of course they were finished with steam cars by 1910, and Stanley's kept on making mountain wagons and selling them. It's not too hard to look in newspaper archives and find a little note in 1912 or 13 or 14 about someone who just bought their brand new Stanley Mountain bus, and they're going to be running a passenger service between these 2 points.
There you go. And I think that's how you found out some information about our Stanleys and when Clarence bought his, right? Was through newspaper ads? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I was fortunate enough to find an advertisement for our car being sold by its previous owner. And this was in 1922. And they pointed out that the car was in excellent condition. They just didn't need it anymore. The name of the company was Litchfield Shuttle Company, and that was in Southbridge, Massachusetts. They made shuttles for weaving. Apparently, the best I can tell, they bought this thing to transport employees. They must have run their own small service for bringing people into work.
So how did Clarence come about owning his first mountain wagon?
Well, he was a Stanley dealer for the Delaware area in the time period around 1909 or 10 through the mid-teens. So he would have certainly known their entire product line and had the ability to acquire whatever he thought he needed. And as far as I can tell, he owned at least 2 of these. One of them, I think he actually used for hire purposes, for running excursions, and he may have used it for an actual bus route in the Wilmington area. The other one he bought in 1913 because 1913 was the 50th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg, and so it was a big deal in Gettysburg. There were lots of Civil War veterans still surviving at that time, veterans of that battle. So people were coming to Gettysburg and participating in events and visiting, and so he figured that he could take a mountain wagon over there and make some money hauling people around, touring battlefields, and so he did that, and he formed a little company. It was a company to operate this mountain wagon and give tours. And there's a wonderful picture that you have showing it loaded up with people on a battlefield, with monuments behind it. Very neat.
So he was able to fully fund the purchase of the mountain wagon through giving rides, correct?
I don't know what the financial balance was there, but it must have helped, because I get the impression that he was pretty busy all summer with that.
Oh, I'm sure.
Or the people that he hired, of course, he would have been in York Lynn, but his organization, the organization that he created, was over there.
Yeah. And so I am dying to know a little bit more if you came across any other information of this picture of Clarence Marshall giving a ride to those 12.
Oh, isn't that neat? The cool thing about it was that it was possible to find a little news clipping that was associated with that exact picture. It was just like miraculous, and it's so neat that I'll just read it here. The little headline says "Auto Party to Valley Forge," and this is dated June 7th, 1915. Under the direction of T. Clarence Marshall, who was at the wheel of his 6-seated mountain automobile, a party of young women had an enjoyable trip to Valley Forge, Pennsylvania Sunday. They returned via Phoenixville, Coatesville, and Westchester, arriving home about sunrise the next morning. And it actually lists the names of all of these young ladies who he hauled over there on an overnight trip to Valley Forge.
Do you think that was possibly something that they had booked through his course?
I think it was. I think they hired him to take them on this trip they wanted to go on.
So that's really great that we have that little nugget of information there.
Yeah.
I don't think we really have. You probably haven't come across really any other trips that he gave people or anything. Just that he did it, correct?
Right. Yeah. In fact, that same newspaper, almost the very same clipping. What's directly below it on the page? It says T. Clarence Marshall has sold his 3-horsepower mountain steamer, and it was probably that car. That Valley Forge trip must have been about the last thing it ever did under his ownership.
So you only had that car for 2 years. And do you know, I guess about, right?
Right.
Do you know what happened to it afterwards, or?
No idea. There were other mountain wagons in Gettysburg for tourist purposes, and one of those actually has survived. And unfortunately, it's very clearly not the one that Clarence had. But it's interesting that there's that tiny little connection there.
Clarence also owned another mountain wagon before our current one.
There was a well-known antique car collector in California who started his collecting in the late 30s and early 40s and built a really significant collection. He kind of specialized in race cars, but he had a lot of stuff. And his name was Lindley Bothwell. And as early as 1944, he had a mountain wagon that had been serving as an auto stage. In fact, the name of the business that this mountain wagon operated under was still painted on the side of it at the time that Bothwell owned it. He had it in unrestored condition. I don't know if he ever operated it or not, but he still owned it in 1948. I know that much. And there was another owner, but sometime after that, it passed into Clarence's hands. They did a restoration on it. They painted it green, which is kind of different. There aren't any green mountain wagons anymore. And ownership of that passed to Tom, and he ended up donating it to the Mercersburg Academy for a fundraising auction that they were doing, which was his alma mater. A fellow named Charles Del Marco bought it at that time, and Del Marco sold it to our good friend Rob Riley. And Rob, for a short period of time, actually ran a Stanley ride-giving business out of the Strasburg Railroad with that mountain wagon. And it has since moved on, and it's now in Texas. Yeah, as far as I can tell, as a matter of fact, the one with the women in it, he might have owned that even less length of time, because I think that was a newer one than the one that he used at Gettysburg. I've studied the pictures really carefully, and it seems really likely that they are two different cars.
So Clarence may have owned 4 mountain wagons.
Over the entire, put together.
So I guess we can move on to our mountain wagon. Of course, I'm just curious, as always, how did we get the mountain wagon that we have today, that we use?
In the late 1940s, that was not very long after the actual time of the Stanley Company's operation. And so some of its principals were still around, notably Fred Marriott, who, of course, is a major figure in Stanley history, and also a man named George Monroe, who happens to be Brent Campbell's grandfather. And George Monroe had been an employee of the Stanleys, and he was also an employee of Fred Marriott, and he had lots and lots of steam knowledge, expertise. And as a matter of fact, there's a wonderful book that was written in the early 50s by a man named George Woodbury, and it's called The Story of a Stanley Steamer. I recommend it to everyone. It's a story of him restoring a Stanley that he sought out and found. The reason I bring it up is because he mentions George Monroe in this book. He gives everyone different names, but George Monroe had come to help him, do some final commissioning work when he got his car going. But apparently George Monroe knew where this car was, and apparently Clarence found out that he knew and was interested in it. And it was even that early, it was really kind of a hush-hush thing, apparently a lot of people would have been interested in it if the word had gotten out. And there are some letters in the library there that talk about this, and they're like, please don't tell anybody about this. I haven't really worked it out yet,
Wow.
But by 1948, Clarence had bought this car, and Tom said they drove it down from where it was in Massachusetts. When they got it, they had to stop and change some tires on the way. But it's just kind of amazing, that something like that could have been sitting there. I mean, it's amazing and it's not amazing, because Clarence knew Stanleys, and he knew steam. Tom would often said, and you see it in some of his stories, my father rarely had any trouble. He said that over and over again. So Clarence was a good Stanley man. So they brought it back and they did some paint work on it. At the time, I don't know, for quite a few years it had wheels that were not of the right size. If you look at those early pictures, you can see the diameter of the wheel is smaller, and the section of the tire is larger, because it would have been easier to find wheels like that and tires to fit them. But eventually, Tom had the correct wheels fabricated, and so now we're running those great, tall, slender wheels with the right size tires. And Clarence drove it a lot when he first got it. He took it on Glidden tours, and there are lots of pictures of it from those early days. The thing that I found most interesting most recently was that letter that I gave you a copy of. And this is a letter from Fred Marriott to Clarence, who says,
Can you, before you go into the letter, describe to people who may not know who Fred Marriott is?
Oh, okay. Fred Marriott was an employee of the Stanleys from the very earliest days, the early 1900s. He had been a bicycle racer before, and I think he came on perhaps as a test driver or something like that, but he became an integral part of the company as far as technical support, and he's mainly famous. He achieved fame far beyond the world of Stanleys, because in 1906 he was driving the Stanleys special purpose-built land speed record car, which was this light thing made out of sticks and canvas with a monstrous steam power plant in it. And Fred got in this thing, and he drove it at 127 miles an hour in 1906. Stanleys were pretty sure they could do better than that, and they came back in 1907. They had tweaked a few things, and he got back in it again. And when he went for his record run there was a problem, some combination, it appears, of the conditions of the sand, rough conditions of the sand, and perhaps a problem in this light canvas structure that the thing had. But it got out of control and was just kind of shattered into pieces. Fortunately, Fred was not badly injured. But the estimate at that time was that at the time that wreck happened, the car was probably traveling about 150 miles an hour, which is just phenomenal. Nobody in any kind of car traveled that fast for years after that.
That's bravery right there.
And being able to do it in a 1907 Stanley, even though there were very special components, it's mind-boggling. And having the nerve to get in that little thing, yeah. It didn't even have a steering wheel. It used a tiller for steering.
So can we chat? I got you a little sidetracked off the Fred Marriott letter.
Yes.
That was me. But I'd love for you to chat a little bit more about the contents of that letter.
So this letter I have in front of me here was written in April of 1955. And there was some discussion about the serial number of this car, which has actually raised an interesting question that I'm still trying to do some final research on. But what Fred pointed out is that he was looking in the factory delivery record book, which he still had from his time at the factory, and which actually still exists today. And he said, I'm looking at this page right now, and it says that car is a model 822 20-passenger mountain wagon, built in 1915 and delivered in January 1916. And it also shows that it was the only model 822 delivered. And said the really cool thing was that he actually remembered this car when it was constructed by the factory, because he finished up by saying, Stanley's tested it as 20 passenger, and I have seen 20 of his employees sitting in it for a test run several times. It would be at least more room and comfortable for 15. So they would have, to get 20 people in it, obviously they had to stuff 4 people in a seat. And yeah, people were a little smaller back then, and you could do it if you really wanted to, but calling it 15 passenger makes more sense. But obviously the interesting things in there are his statement that this is the only one of these that the company ever built, and it basically survived unmolested to the present day. And we have the kind of honor and privilege to be able to use it and share it with hundreds of thousands of people. It's really great.
So now we're going to head on over to our carriage house, where we keep some of our automobiles that we work on, and it is also where we store our mountain wagon. And we're going to be joined by Dan Citron. He is a board member here at the Marshall Steam Museum, and he's going to tell us a little bit more about the mountain wagon and his experience working it and driving it.
Hi everybody, my name is Dan Citron. I'm a board member here at the Marshall Steam Museum, and this is our 1915 Stanley Mountain Wagon. This vehicle gives rides at all of our Steaming Day events, and so it's probably given more rides than any other mountain wagon in existence. The Stanley Company made truck chassis and the power plants for them, but they never bodied the trucks. They would sell them off to other companies that would put bodies on them or make them into fire trucks or whatever the case may be, and they stuck with more of their car chassis. So they had 9-passenger mountain wagons and then 12-passenger mountain wagons, and they said, well, let's try a 15-passenger mountain wagon on the truck chassis. They made it, it was okay, but it wasn't worth it to them. So they said, we'll just stick with the 12-passenger. The great thing about the Stanleys is if you ask them really nicely, or maybe just nicely, that they would do something special for you. So if you wanted a car a certain color and it wasn't a color they offered that year, as long as their paint supplier had that color, then they would usually do it for you. For whatever reason, whoever ordered this particular mountain wagon, they probably asked really nicely, asked to have an extra seat put on. So we have 5 seats instead of the normal 4. It was made this way, you can tell that by looking at it. And so we know this is how it came out of the factory. So this particular mountain wagon, its history, it was up in New England when Tom's father purchased it. and it had actually been used as a logging truck. So except for this front seat here, which obviously is needed for the driver, all the rear seats were gone, the top was gone, and it was being used to haul logs up and down mountains. And the company was ready to sell it. They weren't really using it much anymore. He inquired, they reached a solution. So he and Tom went up, they purchased it. Tom figured he would be following in the family's Packard, which also sometimes doubled as a tow vehicle in case it broke down. Because they were told it was operational, they made sure. They also asked about the other benches and the top, and the folks at the logging company said, well, we meant to throw those out, but I don't think we ever got around to it. We threw them in the back of the warehouse. Let's see if they're still there. So they went and in the back corner of the warehouse behind a whole bunch of other stuff where the benches all piled up and the top. Now the top was beyond repair, but there was enough of it there that it could be used as a model to actually make a recreation. The benches obviously needed some upholstery work and everything like that because they weren't treated particularly well, but they had them, which was the big deal. When they were getting ready to go, Tom was about ready to follow his father, and this is a story he told me quite a few years ago, and he said, you know, my father said, okay, you drive it home. And he was shocked because he had never driven a Stanley by himself out on the open road like that distance before. And so he said, sure, and his father said, yeah, it'll be fine, I'll be right behind you. And so Tom did all the normal things, he knew how to drive the cars already, and he says, you know, I don't really remember much about that trip. I must have pulled over a few times because I was worried about things and, you know, make sure my father could check them over. But I got it home in one piece and we were good to go and everything was working. So this is actually the first car Tom drove by himself for any great distance as well. Back in the magic age of steam, which was in the 1970s, Tom Marshall, who he and his father are the ones who put together the collection, he put in a train that went around the property, the Auburn Valley Railroad, and actually he and his father put that in the 1960s. It continued on. He built a pond, and inside the pond was a small steam paddle wheel boat, but it actually ran on house steam, so there was a bigger boiler and it was piped out to it, so kids could just get in it would go around on its tether. And then the Mountain Wagon also gave rides, and there were actually two Mountain Wagons. There was a 12-passenger and then this 15-passenger, and they kind of overlapped their use in the magic age of steam. This one was red, that one was painted green, so you could definitely tell them apart, plus this one has the extra seat. The green one was eventually sold. This one has stayed here on the property, and it kind of continues its same use as it did during the magic age of steam. It gives rides around the Auburn Heights mansion. It rarely leaves the property. It goes for a couple of shows, maybe here or there, and then also sometimes it'll go on special runs like ice cream runs. We have a great place that's not too far down the road. They have all the cows, they make all the ice cream right there. They're actually related to the Marshall family. This is the Mitchell family. And so sometimes the Mountain Wagon will go on what we call an ice cream run, which is a fun way to give our drivers some experience, and then also allow the other volunteers who maybe don't drive the cars, but they get a chance to ride in them out on the road, and we all go and enjoy some ice cream together. We show the cars to anybody who's there, and then we head on back. So we kind of take a meandering route. And that was actually my first time driving this vehicle off the property. Myself and another driver who also had never driven it off the property, we said, okay, yeah, we were assigned this car and we were ready for it. We trained on it already. And then it was completely loaded up. And neither of us had actually driven the Mountain Wagon when it was completely loaded. When it's empty like this, it drives a lot like any of the other Stanleys. It's just a little bit longer. When it's completely full of people like it was that night, it handles a lot differently. And so before we left, Tom came over to us and kind of pulled us to the side and said, remember, don't take the turns particularly fast because you're really top heavy right now and you'll just fall right over. And, you know, we already knew that, but we appreciated it. And, you know, we were taking it nice and easy and we got there no problem. We got back no problem. The only thing that happened is when we were firing up, my co-driver, he was, we were cleaning the nozzles in the front and getting everything prepped and ready to go. And when he went to tighten it down, it snapped right off. So we had to get that out really quickly and put a new nozzle in. And then, you know, that's something that happens from time to time on the car, so it's not a big deal. And we always have spare parts ready to go. So we were able to get that taken care of, and we got there, we had ice cream, and everybody was happy. So on steaming days, we load up the Mountain Wagon. We usually don't squeeze 15 people in. It's usually 2 per seat, unless they're kids, then maybe 3. And a lot of times, we let kids sit up here with the drivers. Depending on their size, 1 or 2 of them. Their parents are usually sitting right behind. And we'll go around and try to explain. It's hard to talk to everybody when you're in the driver's seat since you have 5 seats, but we try to, and always warn people before we blow the whistle, because Stanley's never originally had steam whistles attached to them, but most of the cars in our collection have had steam whistles added, because if you have a boiler and you have all that steam, it's a lot of fun to blow a steam whistle. So we do have a steam whistle attached. It sounds just like a train whistle. And since on the steaming days, we also have our Auburn Valley Railroad going, which is our 1/8 size railroad. It's going around, they're blowing their whistles. We can answer them back with the whistle on the Mountain Wagon. And the kids always love that, although some of them think it's a little too loud. And we have a good time, and we try to give them some of the facts. And if we have, a big crowd and people are waiting in line, we have people talking to them while they're waiting, so they can learn a little bit more about the Mountain Wagon. We also have a Roush & Lang electric car and a Model T, so they can kind of get all 3 competing technologies and try them all out. And everybody usually agrees with us that steam was definitely the best at that time period. So we have a lot of fun, and hopefully you can come out sometime.
All right, so we have with us tonight Laura Geiner. She is the programs director over at the Collections on Palmetto in Palmetto, Florida. And she's here to talk to us tonight about her own Mountain Wagon wonder at their museum. So Laura, welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you so much, Allison, for having me. We are actually in Clearwater, Florida, first of all, I wanted to point out, but we're on Palmetto Street. We do have a mountain wagon. I've not seen it in several years, but it's similar to your mountain wagon from what I recall and understand. It is a steel frame mountain wagon. It's a 12-seater, and it came from the Rocky Mountain Transportation Company. But then Russell Durand owned it, and then John Borden owned it, and we did acquire it from John Borden. Right now, undergoing a restoration, but Daryl Kendall is restoring it. So the pictures that you'll see also show what Daryl is doing to it. So we're really excited, and we're even hoping that maybe it'll be done like by summer, and we can do some touring or pick it up something. So yeah.
We're actually looking to get it up and running when it comes out of restoration.
That is what we intend to do. All of Marvin and Linda Feldman's vehicles at the collection are operational. And they built the museum so that the vehicles could actually go in and out of the museum. There are 2 big bay doors, and the way that they're arranged is they can just easily drive in and out. And that's our intention. And Marvin was very much inspired by the Marshall Steam Museum and Linda. And in fact, we really had that on mind when we were planning, when Marvin himself was designing the museum. So we have a railroad, and that is, in part because of the Marshall Steam Museum. Anyway, so yeah, we intend to use it for community events, as you guys do. So we're inspired by you guys.
The Seal Cove Auto Museum sent us footage of them firing up their 1914 Model 812 Mountain Wagon for the first time in 4 years. Even when they were firing it up then, about 4 years ago, it wasn't running properly. So you can tell in this video, when they do get it fired up, the excitement is palpable.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Do a burnout, Bernie. Come on.
So when you get the wheels pull over, the tire rubs on the, is that what's going on here? Yeah. Okay.
All right, so I hope you are all mountain wagon experts at this point from all the wonderful information that we've gotten from Kelly Williams, Dan Citron, and the two partner museums that we had given us some updates. And now we are at the Q&A portion of the program. And so I'm going to bring in our, bring in our guests for this. We have Kelly Williams, who's coming right in. And then we have two guys. We have Bill Barter, if you want to give a wave. I remember meeting you before, and Tim Weiss, who I just met over email. So really glad to see you all for this portion of the program.
Great to be here.
It's nice to be with you. Yeah, great to be here.
So I'm going to start actually with Bill and Tim. So let me just introduce Bill real quick. Bill Barter is the Curator of Collections over at the Seal Cove Auto Museum, and Tim Weiss is the Associate Director. So we're glad to have both of you here. And I just would love to hear some comments. A lot of us here at the museum, I'm sure Kelly can relate, when you get that steam car fired up after it's been troublesome for a while, it feels really good. And you can tell that in the video.
Yeah, as you can see in the film, it's pretty exciting when it does fire up, but it can be a really frustrating process, especially since ours hadn't been used significantly for quite a few years. And it seemed like every time we got one problem solved, another problem would pop up. And we had two retired engineers working on it. One a retired aircraft engineer, and the other, at one time, a Maine Maritime Academy instructor in marine steam. And they wanted to know not what to do to get the thing fired up, but why they were doing it, which took a lot longer. They didn't just want to take instructions, they just wanted to do it. But it also means we've got a very detailed written process for firing it up, right from rolling it out of the building to pumping up the water pressure and pumping up the fuel pressure and firing it and so on.
It's that thick.
That's thick.
Kelly, that doesn't sound familiar at all, I'm sure.
No. And when that film that you just saw was made, it was just before winter hit. We couldn't have had that thing outdoors another time, so it hasn't been out of the building since then. And of course, we've had COVID to contend with and a knee replacement or two. So everybody here is anxious for spring because we want to get this critter outside and back on the road. It is right here with its mouth.
Oh, how wonderful.
People always want to know, how does steam work? We're always happy to tell them until their eyes glaze over.
Kelly's nodding here because you might know from experience.
Kelly, I will find you your serial number very soon. If it exists on the car, I'm going to find it for you.
So that's actually a great segue to talk about Kelly a little bit too, because Kelly, which I didn't get to really mention in the video that you saw, also keeps up, or has been keeping up, a Stanley register of as many Stanleys as he can find around the world. We have a really neat map in our museum, if you've ever come and visited, that shows little pins, kind of all the different locations that he was able to find. And so he's helping these two gentlemen over here with their mountain wagons. So anything you want to share about kind of, Kelly, your experience trying to collect all of these serial numbers and all this information on different Stanleys?
It can be a challenge because the little brass plate that came from the factory that has the number stamped in it is easily taken off over the years because somebody thought it looked nice, or there are some other places on the car where these numbers can sometimes be found, but they're on parts that are often replaced, which, floorboards, which it's easy to make a new plank of wood and stick it in there if the old one is getting a little old and rotten, and then that piece of information is gone too. So I'm always trying to learn exactly which car is which, because I'm sort of interested in the history of each car.
Yes, and Bill, yours, oh my gosh, Kelly, you were so instrumental in kind of delving into the mystery a little bit behind our mountain wagon, our current one. And I would love to hear kind of where you find some of your resources, not just for that mystery, but all the other kind of Stanleys that you do research on. Oh, I think you muted yourself, Kelly.
There we go. Main things that I used when I started out with this register were some rosters that had been published by some of the antique car clubs that contained all of the cars that members owned, and those were in the 50s and 60s. And then there was a fellow named Robert Sprague, who was sort of my predecessor along this line. And in the 70s and 80s, he compiled a list of all of the Stanleys that he could find out about, and that was a great foundation for my work. So those are the main sources that I used.
Yep, and our collection.
Oh yeah, and being able to talk to people, people like Tom and Brent Campbell and Pat Farrell, people who have known hundreds of Stanleys, kind of personally. They've been around them. They know the people. They know the cars. So they've also been wonderful resources for research.
Absolutely.
Kelly, let me jump in here. Who was the Campbell you just mentioned?
Brent Campbell.
And where does he live?
He kind of divides his time between Florida and Massachusetts these days.
Oh, okay. Because we've got a car here, a Stanley here at the museum, that for years has been a mystery of the local Stanley aficionados. They'd look at it and they'd say, it doesn't look quite right. Why is it done this way? It doesn't look like a Model C.
That is an issue, yeah.
It turns out it's this Model C.
Right.
And I found out just last year that it was restored by a man named Campbell in Oklahoma.
That was Leon Campbell.
That was Leon Campbell, okay.
Right. No connection.
And he told me that he had to virtually build the engine from scratch, and the hubs were so rotted away that he had to turn them out of a billet. And he was thrilled to death to find out where it was, because he had no idea where it had ended up.
Oh, you spoke to Mr. Campbell yourself?
I did, yes.
Oh, fabulous.
Yep. And I'll tell you an interesting little tidbit of information. He's a machinist, so he built all the mechanical parts. He told me that a friend of his who was a cabinet builder and carpenter built the body for it and charged him $1,000 and a week's worth of machine tool work to build the body.
Sounds like a bargain. Now did he? The thing that always catches, I'm sorry, I'm hijacking things here. The thing that always catches my eye is the seat, because you wouldn't have seen a spindle seat on a Model C. Did he talk about that at all?
Well, the way he described it is that the car came from a farm in Connecticut, and when it was found, it was up to the hubs in dried mud. And he didn't say that the body was repaired. He said the body was built. And I kind of got I think I'd refer to it as maybe not a reproduction, a recreation maybe.
I like that word.
Not really a restoration, because
Right.
there wasn't much left of it.
That was probably a seat that he was able to find.
Yep. And the fellow who had the questions about it might be familiar to, his name is Dave Alt.
Oh, sure.
Dave had a Model C. So he knew what it was supposed to look like, and he just looked at it and scratched his head.
Right.
Though I'm really glad you have that camera that you can swivel around. Do you have any other Stanleys in your collection, or is it?
I'm going to tell you, it's actually my laptop somehow, because this is the only one that works out here. So it's pretty heavy. But we'd love to show you a couple more Stanleys if you'd love to see them.
Yeah, let's take a minute and check them out.
Show him another red smoke, fire breathing.
Oh yeah, we got this steam thing back here. 1881 Amoskeag pumper.
This isn't normally on display, but it's being loaned to the Portland Fire Museum.
Get my head
So
out
it's
of
an
it.
1881 Amoskeag 2 horsepower, pulled by 2 horses, steam pumper, built by the Manchester Locomotive Company in Manchester, New Hampshire.
Oh, that is so cool.
Steam while you're right there. Some of the other steam cars we've got, well, we'll give you the Stanleys first. This is our 1908 Stanley Model K semi-racer. purchased originally by a man named Scott Libby down in the Lewiston, Auburn area. And his family kept this car until we got it back in the 70s sometime. It's never been restored. It's all original. And it's our understanding that it's one of 3 in existence and the only one that is in original condition. So we sort of stretch things and say, well, we're the second owners that stayed in the Libby family until it came here. And then we've got the Model C that we showed you a minute ago. And why don't you swing around this way to show the Stanley relative. 1900 locomobile, and it was either built in Bridgeport, Westboro, or Newton, Massachusetts. It was right in the 1900s when they were just transitioning and trying to decide where locomobile was going after they bought the Stanley business. And this one is ready to run except for a sight glass. So I have hopes for this summer.
Oh, excellent.
And then another one that you probably haven't seen before. This is a 1900 Skene, S-K-E-N-E, or maybe a 1900 Rand, R-A-N-D, in either case built in Lewiston, Maine. If it's a Skene, it's one of 12. If it's a Rand, it's one of 3. And it was completely restored by Mark Herman about 4 years ago. It ended up in the UK when it was discovered after 50 years in a barn where all car aficionados have heard this story. Young man bought a new car, went off to war, car got put in the barn, he died, and the car stayed there for 10, 20, 30, 50, 70 years. You never know if those stories are true or not, but that's supposedly what happened to this one. This car's done the London to Brighton 4 or 5 times before it came back from Europe. And if it turns out to be a Rand, it's just almost impossible to tell them apart. As you know, Kelly, so many of these parts came off the shelf. And I've seen another steam car that purports to be a Rand, and unless I could put them right next to each other, I don't think we could tell the difference.
Those cars that were made right at that time period, 1900, 1901, there was just a lot of people making them, and they just all looked at what each other was doing, and they made them about the same way. And like you say, they had the same parts available to them.
They look almost exactly the same in the suspension too.
Yeah, look at that.
And here's another one that is probably not familiar to many people. This is a 1901, maybe a 1902 Victor steam carriage, built in Chicopee Falls, Massachusetts. And one real different thing about it is this: steel body, wooden seat, the rear deck is cast aluminum. And Victor produced the steam-powered water and fuel pumps that they sold to Locomobile. Locomobile bought Victor, and then Locomobile got sold back to Stanley, and they started building big gasoline-powered cars. So it goes right around in a circle.
Can you show me the other one too?
Yeah, one more Stanley. I forgot about this one.
Don't
Yes.
forget.
We'll take one more Stanley.
One more Stanley.
One more Stanley. 1911 Toyotano, model 63. This car has been modified slightly for touring. It's actually got hydraulic brakes in the rear end, and has been here at the Seal Cove Auto Museum at least since 2002.
I'll swing around and give you a little side view of it because
Yeah.
it is a pretty car.
We think all Stanleys are pretty, but that's just
They're
us.
all pretty.
Wow, thank you guys so much for taking on this like bonus tour of your place.
Well, that's why we stayed in the museum tonight. It's late night for us, so we got to get home and eat dinner. But we're always happy to open up the doors for you guys.
Well, we appreciate you guys joining us. I have a few questions from our listeners. You guys can feel free to jump in. They might be geared more towards Kelly, but Bill and Tim, if you want to join in too, feel free to. So the first question I'll put up on the screen, but I'll also say it. Is the Mountain Wagon more difficult to operate than a regular Stanley? So I guess, is there any difference or anything that you guys have noticed?
I would have to say no, because it's everything is identical. All of the parts are the same. Some of them are a little bit bigger. You know, the engine's bigger, the boiler's bigger, but conceptually and, you know, all of the things that you need to do to drive a small Stanley are exactly the same ones for the big one.
It's like jumping in a pickup truck versus your normal car. It's just a little longer.
Yeah, that's a great comparison.
The big thing that I had to get used to is the fact that when you take your foot off the accelerator or back off on the throttle, it doesn't necessarily slow down. No engine braking unless you're really brave or foolish.
Nope. All right, another question. How fast can a mountain wagon go? Anyone can answer that?
Well, it's an interesting. It's kind of a typical Stanley question for any of them. And I would say that our mountain wagon could, if everything was working well, it could probably cruise at 35 to 40 miles an hour, which is pretty good. It could probably go. You might be able to. We would never attempt this, but you might be able to make it go 50 for a brief period of time. But just like with all Stanleys, it turns out that they can't make steam fast enough to keep a pace like that. They can only make steam fast enough to keep a continuous pace of, you know, 30, 40, something like that.
That's fast enough.
Absolutely, yeah.
I always feel like I'm going so much faster in a Stanley than I really am.
Out in the open and high up, yep.
Yep. All right, we have two more questions, which you guys may or may not be able to answer. How much do mountain wagons usually go for? I know they don't come up in auctions too often, so we might not have a more modern number.
The last two I've seen go at auction were 120,000 and 210,000, but the 210 was 1915, and that had a lot of provenance behind it. So another former James Melton car. So those are the only two that I've really seen in the past decade that have gone at auction.
They just don't come up very much. That's one of the reasons people build them.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. All right, last question. So this can go for yours as well, Tim and Bill. But do you know how many miles our mountain wagon has?
I actually don't.
I should have looked before.
It's not. it's the
Let
number.
me go check the odometer here. Oh wait, it doesn't.
Yeah, some of them don't have odometer. So
We do have a
Obviously,
speedometer, right?
No, we don't.
No, not on this one. Yep.
obviously our car has carried many people, but it hasn't carried them very far. So, you know, the little circle around the house is, I don't know, 1/10 of a mile or something like that. So, although it's spent an awful lot of time turning left, it may not have that many overall miles on it.
So it's a NASCAR mountain wagon. You only turn one way, right?
I like that thought. I'm going to keep that when I see it just cruising by, you know, at the slow pace around the property.
We
All
hope
right.
we hope to put a few miles on ours this year, but it's up in the air. We gotta get it going again in the spring, and we'll see how many miles it lets us put on it. But it seems to be real solid.
Now, do you just take them out for rides just to experience them with your volunteers and staff, or do you actually give people rides in some of your cars?
I'll let you play to that one. We might. I mean, there has been talk that it would be a great car to drive people around in. Luckily, this year we were able to acquire a 1941 Pontiac Woody station wagon that seats 8 as well, and it has hydraulic brakes, and it's easy to drive. So that'll probably star as our ride day car this year. But if somebody gets lucky and we're firing it up on the day, we might take some passengers out in it.
We don't have much driving course here on the property. You know, we've just got the driveway, and then we're on the public road for at least 0.2 of a mile before we can get on sort of a back gravel road where we might feel a bit safer. But it's still a little bit spooky there. There's the cars, they're wide open, all kinds of liability questions. And the phrase here, when you leave the property with a museum cars, have you got a cell phone with you? And because it's so mountainous here, cell phone reception isn't very good. So you just don't know.
I did get walkie-talkies though this year. GMR.
That's actually very smart.
You have to be resourceful on an island in Maine, so.
Yes, and actually, this is a great. I know you guys got to get going soon because it's almost dinner time. So I'm putting up your website right here, Bill and Tim. But if there's anything, last thing you want to pitch for your museum, or any really cool projects that you guys are working on that you want to share with our listeners.
We did miss one steam car, by the way, if you want to do an about face.
Oh, yeah.
Ooh, a big one.
We got
No steam car left behind.
a white Model MM. As big as a mountain wagon and twice as heavy.
Yeah, it's impressive how much more this thing just has presence than the mountain wagon. It does make the mountain wagon look small. You can see the suspension on this thing is a bit more robust than the mountain wagon.
I didn't think I would find a vehicle that could overshadow the mountain wagon in terms of just like size and presence. And I think you guys
It
are
is a
coming.
condensing one, and it's impressive. Give you a couple of shots here.
Some of those big whites, you can put the top down and you can walk underneath it when it's down. The cars are that tall.
It really looks like you can too. That's amazing. But no, we're always working on something, getting something new running, and hopefully 2021 is a great year for everybody in the museum world. So
Yes.
we'll see how it
Only
goes.
hope. Well, on that note, I think it's a wonderful note to end on. Bill and Tim and Kelly, I just want to thank you all so much for joining us for this program and contributing it to it. Kelly, you blew me away with just everything that you know about Stanley's, and it's just been really great working with you. And one real quick pitch is you can actually take a ride in our Stanley Mountain Wagon. You can come visit us for one of our Seaman Days, which starts on the first Sunday in June, and then it's the first Sunday of every month after that until November. So come out and see us, take a ride. Hopefully we whetted your interest a little bit in wanting to take a ride in what we call Delaware's only steam bus. So thank you all so much for listening. Thank you, Bill, Tim, and Kelly, and everyone have a great night. And we'll see you next month.
We'll be in touch, guys. Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.